Labs here. Today we're going to be roasting a new type of roast. We are going to be roasting an El Salvadorian roast, and we've got something kind of special that I'll explain with this El Salvadorian here in a minute. So, what we're going to do is we're going to preheat the machine. We're going to bring it up to about 200 degrees. With this B-more, I do like to bring it up, get a little bit of a pre on it. It does help roast kind of develop a little bit more for what I'm looking for. So, it's going to go ahead and preheat it. That's just preheating just means that I am bringing it up to heat without any beans in it. So bring it up to 200. So we're going to be roasting ourselves an El Salvadorian from the Santa Ana region. Um, according to the package, it says to bring it to city, full city to get the best taste. We got nougat, brown sugar, caramel, marked with orange, candy lemon, turmeric, black tea finish. This one says keep it light and keep it bright. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring this up to a light roast. Just try to keep this as light as possible. The reason I say that it is going to be somewhat unique is that I went to Black Dog Coffee House in Lenexa, Kansas today, and I actually picked up some Messenger coffee. Now, Messenger Coffee, they are a specialty roaster here in Kansas City. They do several types from all different varieties. It is a very premium brand. They do a really nice job of roasting. The reason this is special is because I have an El Salvadorian Santa Ana here, and I have Messenger. I bought an El Salvadorian Santa Ana that they went ahead and roasted on December 30th. What I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially try to match these up. So I'm going to try to get this to be the same roast level, and then I'm going to compare some of the tastes. Just sometimes, as a new roaster, I like to take people who are already doing really good work and take a look at what's going on. So I got someone saying, "What's up in the chat?" Not much. What we're doing is we are going to be roasting some El Salvadorian coffee today. So this is actually what the professional or the commercial roaster from Messenger Coffee in Kansas City looks like. This is the green beans that we have. We are going to try to make this look like this. So right now, just kind of let you know what's going on here is we are warming up the machine. This is a B-more 2000. It is strictly a home roaster. It looks kind of like a little microwave, and it has two heating elements inside of it. But this little machine actually does a pretty good job of bringing coffee to a really nice roast. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is just match it, both the look and the flavor. This is what we would call a city roast. So I'm trying to match the city, and then I'll do a little bit of a flavor comparison. It just gives me a little bit more to go off of than just my flavor alone. So I'm taking something that a professional has done and trying to match it up. All right, so right now we're going to preheat this to 200 degrees, and then we're going to drop a half pound in. I'm going to be roasting at a half pound. Um, with this B-more, a half pound is really kind of the sweet spot in getting a good, fast, solid roast. So I'm just going to drop it here, measure out a half pound. And throw it in our roasting chamber. Now this is kind of unique because it has these little, you can see it has the agitators in here. These agitators actually allow for the coffee to mix up while the drum is roasting so that it doesn't just pool here in the bottom and one side gets roasted and one side doesn't get roasted. So as it agitates, it kind of kicks the beans around and it gives it a pretty nice and even roast. So we're going to drop the green beans into our hopper here. Put this stuff away. We're done with that. And then we are going to set it up. With this machine, you have a couple of different varieties about what you can do. there is some control over the temperature. For this roast, what I'm going to do is bring it to full tower, meaning that the heat's going to be on full blast all the while this is setting up. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me the opportunity to get the beans as hot as possible before they start their development. Beans generally start to crack and pop, and that's what we call first crack, right around about 390 degrees. So what I want to do with this machine is try to get those beans dried out and ready to enter that first crack as quickly as possible. Then once it starts to develop, I'm actually going to cut the heat back to about 50% and really let the beans start to do all their own work. Yeah, so 390, at that point, what's happening with the beans is all of the water has gotten come out of the beans, and the CO2 is actually trying to escape the beans. By escaping, it begins to sizzle and pop. Okay, so what we're going to be doing throughout this roast is actually just keeping an eye on the internal temperature. On a commercial roaster, they're going to have probes inside that actually tells them the bean temperature. Because this is just a little home roaster, it has a hopper basket in here. What is taking place is you couldn't really actually get a probe into the beans because it would get all tangled up. So with this machine, I try my best just to keep a good log about what the internal temperature is, and that gives me kind of an idea of where the beans are at in their development phase. So early on in its development, coffee, as it begins to dry out and all the water begins to leave the coffee beans, what is happening is you're starting to get a what smells like a cooked rice smell. It's very agricultural. It's kind of grassy. It's not the most pleasant scent in the world. Uh, Really, when a green bean, it smells a lot like cut grass. It smells very agriculture, like an agricultural product. What we're going to do is we're going to try to move away from that into a more roasted, burnt sugar kind of smell. So as it's moving through these phases, it's going to be drying out, and the smell is going to be getting progressively better and better as the roast goes along. This is also going to tell me that where the bean is at as far as its development goes. This feels like science class. Coffee is incredibly scientific, and in fact, you could get lost in a lot of these numbers and the dates, the times, the weights. And it is a science, but it's also an art. So a lot of the professional roasters, they do, there is certain like temperatures and heats that they're going to follow, but it is also an art. So there are some that like to go, a lot of heat very early on. Some say to, stretch out the roast. So even though there's a ton of science dumped into it as far as temperatures and weights and charging times and all these different things, there is also a little bit of an art from roaster to roaster. But being that I'm a home roaster, it is good for me to follow kind of a simple set of plans in order so I can make sure I can get something that I can enjoy in my cup. So right now, the internal temperature of the machine is entering about 300 degrees. Again, that is not the bean temperature. That is just how hot the roaster is getting. But it does give me a good idea because by the time the internal temperature can hold a temperature of about 300 degrees, it tells me that the beans are almost dried out and they're beginning to move into the early phases of roasting. Also, just peeking inside the machine, I can see that the beans are moving from a pea green kind of color to more of a yellowish color, and this tells me that the beans are almost dried out, and we are about 4 or 5 minutes away from that first crack that we're looking for. So the temperature is going pretty good, and I can also tell that the beans are getting dried out because the smells are again they're changing from that grassy smell, and I'm getting to get a rich odor of roasted sugars. This is telling me that the beans are on a good phase and the machine is working well. So some other things to keep in mind. What we're actually trying to do is, as the CO2s begin to escape, the sugars inside the beans will begin to push their way to the outside of the bean. Now, there are several types of roasts that a roaster may try to achieve. The first is a light roast or a city roast. This is where the oils and sugars are still locked away in the bean, but they've had some time to develop. The next would be a medium roast. A little bit of oils have moved to the surface of the bean. It's a little bit darker brown, and at this point, some of the sugars have begun to caramelize, and it's moving more towards a bitter taste. As the coffee gets more and more roasted, it gets more and more bitter. So early on in the light roast, it's acidic, and it's moving more towards bitter. Then, as it moves from medium roast or City Plus or Full City, it begins to move into Full City Plus, or this would be known as a dark roast. The dark roast has a lot of the oils on the outside. It's very, very dark. At this point, it enters into what's called second crack, or it's just past second crack. This is your dark roast, and it's very, very bold and very, very bitter at this point. Anything past that, some roasters might call that a French roast or a Vienna roast, and then everything out past that is just carbon because the beans are at a very high risk of burning. So the internal temperature of the machine is at about 320 degrees. The beans are starting to have an early browning phase. The smells are getting a lot more intoxicating. They've definitely, the smell in here has gotten a lot better. The air is getting a little bit rich with smoke, so I'm going to go ahead and flip on my exhaust. And the beans are getting closer and closer to the desired temperature for our first crack to arise. The bean is moving away from this pea green color, and it's entering in, it's getting bigger as well as getting lighter. When you go to a specialty roaster, they will market this bag as a 1 pound bag. Actually, it was 1 pound when it was green. By the time it is fully roasted, it's lost about in this case in ounces, so 16 ounces. It's lost about 4 ounces. So a 1 pound bag that you buy from a specialty roaster is actually 12 ounces because all of the water weight that was in these green beans has evaporated and the beans are much smaller. They are bigger than they were before you roasted them, but they've actually lost weight. So right now, the internal temperature is holding steady at about 320 degrees. The exhaust fan has kicked in. This is going to allow the machine from getting too hot. The beans are still experiencing the heating element. That's how they're still able to heat up, yet the internal temperature of the machine is not going to get any hotter because the exhaust fan has kicked on. So at this point, I'm actually reading the exhaust temperature, and all I'm looking for is that this continues to rise until the exhaust temperature says about 400 degrees. When it enters into first crack, what we want to take place is that exhaust temperature to kind of flatten out, where it just gets to 400 degrees and it kind of just stays stable. Again, that is not the beans temperature, but it's a good marker for me as a roaster of what the temperature of the beans is doing. So, how much coffee will about 12 ounces make? That's a good question. So, that really depends on how much you're using. Baristas and people who make coffee, it's variable from person to person how much coffee they choose. Generally, a good rule of thumb is 15 to 1 or 16 to 1. What that means is 15 grams of water for every 1 gram of coffee that you're using. A half a pound or a full pound of coffee like this is going to be generally about 480 to 500 grams. I'm actually going to just quiet down because we've actually entered into first crack here. So I'm just going to set a different timer. I'm going to cut the heat down to half and slow my drum speed down. You can actually hear the pops taking place. Just looking at the beans, they're about the color that I want, and the development sounds to be about where I want it to be. So I'm going to cut the power altogether. I'm going to kick on an extra exhaust fan. This is called the cooling. I'm going to allow these beans to cool for 30 seconds in this machine. This will allow for any more development to take place. It also will allow the machine just to cool down a little bit. And then I'm going to take the beans out of this and externally cool them. This machine was designed to cool the beans inside of it, but what that's actually going to do is, because there's still a lot of temperature that exists inside this roaster, it's going to continue to roast it well beyond what I want them to be. So to be sure that I'm going to get the roast level that I want, I'm actually going to stop the machine for a second, take the beans out of the machine, and I'm going to take them into a separate room where I've set up a shop vac that's going to suck cool air down from the environment over top of the beans and actually cool these beans in about 4 minutes. So at this point, you can see the beans. You can see a lot of the chaff that's been released. I'm going to go cool these for a couple of minutes, and I'll bring you the finished product, and we can kind of compare the two roasts. So we're cooling the beans down externally. What this does is it just allows me to control how quickly the beans stop roasting now that I've gotten them to the point that I want. And about 4 minutes is, from many people I've talked to that not only use this machine but also commercial roasters, 4 minutes is the ideal time. You don't want to cool your beans down too fast because there's still some development that's taking place, but you don't want to go the entire 13 minutes that the Beamore machine would have you do. You get a little bit of a lot of the floral notes and some of the higher sugar notes that you're going to be looking for in your coffee will get baked off. It is just, I am continuing to run a cool down system in the Beamore because this is an electrical machine. There are a lot of little computer chips and different things in here and thermostats in here that I don't want to melt down by just letting them sit at about 400 degrees for hours and hours. So there are several fans and exhaust fans in here that are cooling the machine down and bringing it to room temperature, and it takes about 13 minutes. Okay. Also, to finish the last question, a pound is going to probably get you about 500 grams. So if you say, let's say I'm going to make 1 cup and I have 15 grams of coffee in 1 cup, I will probably get, you can get probably between 22 and 28 cups of coffee out of a pound of coffee. That really just depends. If you're putting this pound of coffee through a drip, and you can probably do it 12 cups of a drip machine, probably 5 to 6 times. So that might expand that. However, if you're doing like an AeroPress or an espresso, you're going to get a lot less because the amount of coffee you're going to need for the extraction rates for those is going to be less. But a pound of coffee, you can get a lot of mileage out of that. Okay, so I'm getting that the sound is cutting out. I wonder. I have kind of a sound blocker on. Let me go turn off the vacuum and see if that continues. Thank you. All right. So is that still cutting the sound, or is that corrected it? That's a good piece of advice. So what actually I think is happening is I turn the shop vac on. The webcam that I'm using, actually, it has a automatic voice canceling. I think what's happening is that the shop vac is drowning me out, and then it's canceling my voice. So that's good for the record because what is probably I'm going to have to do is I'm either going to move my cooling system a little bit further from this room, or I'm going to have to start doing a different cooling system. So another option that I could do instead of using cool air pulled over the beans is I actually can use water, where I take two bowls and cold water and keep passing the beans back. So I'm not using an air cooled system, I'm using a contact cooled system where the heat will go from the bowl into the water. As long as I have a basin of cold enough water, I'll be able to transfer the heat there. Right. So at this point, we are right where we want to be. You're still going to see a lot of chaff that's hanging out here, but the beans look really good. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to compare them with the messenger roast. And for the most part, these, what I did, well, I'm trying. This is the messenger roast. So the color looks pretty consistent. The one note, huh? One note I am seeing is the beans that I roasted are considerably bigger. I'm just trying to get this right. So here's mine, still has a lot of chaff on it. That's what you're seeing there as far as the extra. And then this is the messenger roast. So the color came out to be pretty consistent. You might notice the beans that I roasted are considerably bigger. The type of bean that I did is actually called a triple A. Um, this is going to get kind of in the weeds of coffee beans, but when they rate beans, it's not actually their quality, it's their size. So you would have an AB, an AA, and then a triple A. So triple A just tells you beans are really big. Doesn't do a ton for the flavor, but in the quality, they tend to value larger beans over a smaller bean because on an open market, you could get you're going to get more weight out of your bigger beans. So bigger beans are considered to be a higher quality. So this triple A are quite a bit bigger. That's the only real difference. I do notice a little bit. I think I could have probably developed these just a little bit longer. Just getting a look. I won't know for sure until the cup. Um, Looking at the messenger beans, they are very smooth, whereas mine there still looks like they were smoothing out a little bit. So when I do the second pound, I may adjust the temperature where I'm dropping the temperature quicker and I'm allowing for the beans to develop a little bit longer. So anyway, that is the overall roast, and I'm very pleased with how this turned out. Now, the real test is going to be the taste test, but overall, I think this ended up being a successful roast for never having done this El Salvadorian before. I haven't tasted a ton of El Salvadorian roasts, um, but I have heard good things. They do have a lot of unique flavors, and of the Central Americans, it's probably the one that I've seen the most recommendations to keep light. Central Americans are notorious for being able to be very good espresso beans, just for their height, their density, and their ability to have these chocolatey notes that really don't come in until the medium or darker roasts. So I am excited that these do have floral notes, especially for an El Salvadorian, and I will give you a full rundown of the taste profiles after I've tasted this, as well as I'll kind of give you my overall comparison to just how both of these coffees from similar regions hold up. Now, just because they're from similar regions, that does tell us that they may have some similar tastes and some similar characteristics, but like anything, there are microclimates. One could have been grown really high up, one could have been grown a little bit lower, different processes. As I mentioned earlier, the messenger was a natural process. as this AAA was a washed process. So all of those are going to change it up just a little bit. So let's shake this out here. All right, so roasted, a little messy, a little extra chaff on here, but roasted to the desirable level. Got it in the can. One last look. There it is. So I think should make an enjoyable cup. And I'm excited to be able to tell you about it. I'll just kind of end the show here really quickly, just giving you an update on a couple of things. First, the Sumatran that I did the last two episodes, the changes that I made from roast one to roast two really did help bring deeper aromatics out. The first roast, just to recap, the first roast, the flavor was pretty good, but it didn't have a lot of aromatics in the bean, and it didn't have a ton in the grind. What I determined was is that I may have underdeveloped it. I cut the heat a little bit too quickly. So what I did for the second roast is I allowed it to develop a little bit longer and go a little bit darker. This helped out immensely. I would even say that the flavor was, enhanced because so much more aromatic, not only in the grind but also in the bean itself, just by allowing it to develop for about 15 to 20 seconds more. So this development time in roasting is very, very important. I will say this: if I do a Sumatran again, I am definitely going to take it to medium, even darker, because I like an acid, pretty acidy flavor in my cup. The Sumatran was very, very acidy. It was almost too acidy even for me, where it was dominating a lot of the other flavors. And reading about Sumatran, many people just tend to take Sumatran medium to dark because of the acid taste. Now, as more people enter in the special coffee community, they're starting to, different flavors for different people. But that's kind of my report on that. Getting that I should give a taste update in the morning on Instagram. That's actually a really good feedback there as well. So I would definitely start doing that. Just kind of having the cup, taking a picture of it, and then giving it some of the just real quick notes about that for these two. A couple other things. The kitchen is coming along really, really nicely. I tend to be one of these give a mouse cookie kind of people, so I tiled it up. I was going to just leave it, but then I didn't really like the way that the old counter looked, so we went and got a new countertop, and next thing you know, we had new shelves. So we're almost done with that, and we should have that up and running within at least a week or two. So be looking for that in the next coming week or so. I'm excited to start adding that, as well as this room. We have a new light. We're going to be getting a new roasting camera. That's just going to be a camera that points directly on the roaster so that the viewer can actually see the roasting while I'm talking about it. And we'll be making some upgrades to the background, making it a little bit more appealing visually, both for the light and for that you're not looking at painted concrete. Other than that, thanks for tuning in late with us. I'm going to try to become a lot more consistent with the times. So I'm really shooting for 8 or 8:30. I haven't decided yet. That's kind of really been up to sleepers in my house. I tend to wait for everyone that needs to be in bed by 8 to be in bed. Um, we're just gonna try to. As new parents of young kids, we always say we want them in by 8, but that goes haywire quick. This tonight is a perfect example of that. But other than that, we're going to try to get a little bit more consistent as we do more of these, so that people can kind of get more used to time that we go on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it short. And I think thanks for everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you guys